Hi Booktube, I'm here with my September TBR. Notice I didn't say game. I'm setting the game aside just for this month because I had a different idea for reading this month. I could have made it work, but I kind of decided not to because it would have been a little more difficult, and that's what I don't want right now, is to make my reading a little more difficult. So I took some inspiration from the readathon happening this month, called Shorty September, hosted by Bert at the Storytime and Soggy Expat Bert, Book Nerd, I believe her channel name is. Sorry if I got that wrong. I'll link it down below. And I'd already picked out my books before I looked at the prompts, so I'm not exactly following along with the readathon, but I just kind of used it as inspiration for this month. And I kind of want to kickstart my reading into a higher gear. So I decided to go for 30 books in 30 months. I know there's a few other channels doing this too. You can use the search bar. I'm not going to list them all below because I don't know them all. So yeah, I'm just going to show you what I'm going to be reading this month. My e-reader's here first, so I'll tell you what I'll be reading. I'm not going to show you the covers because if I click on them, they don't come up. It goes right to the text. So I have Deaf Republic by Ilya Kaminsky, and that is a collection of poems, and Ilya Kaminsky is deaf himself, so that'll be interesting to read poetry from a deaf person, because the rhythm and stuff will be interesting to see how that goes. I also have Flatland by Edwin A. Abbott. I've been meaning to read this one for a long time, ever since I heard about it like years ago, but I just never gotten around to it. It's one of those books, I'm sure we all have them. And it's kind of like a math and philosophical treatise about dimensions. Yeah, and when I mean dimensions, I mean like 3D, 4D, not like maybe alternate dimensions. I don't know. I just know it involves math and dimensions, so we'll see. Untold Night and Day by Bei Sua. This has been on a lot of my TBRs, and yeah, I really don't know what it's about. I think it takes place all in one night, or within 24 hours, and it's written by a South Korean author, and I'm really interested in South Korean culture, so I like to read more books from there. On here we also have The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. I've been meaning to read this. I have The Fire This Time on my bookshelf, and I didn't want to read that until I've read the original James Baldwin version, which is about racism in the States. I can't read this little title here, so I'm just going to refer to my handwritten notes here. Discourse on Method by Rene Descartes. I wanted a variety of things on my, on my list. So, there's a lot of mix of like classics and nonfiction and science fiction and all sorts of different things. So this was one of those, it's a short book. I believe it's only 58 pages, so it's good for one of those days where I have a long work day or not a lot of energy to read. So you'll find that variety too. Everything's under 200 pages except for 3 books, but those are some exceptions. So yeah, Discourse on Method is a classic philosophical essay. I'm going to say a long essay at 58 pages, but an essay nonetheless, I believe. And the last one on my e-reader is The Employees by Olga Ravin, which is, I'm very interested in workers' rights and unionizing and the anti-work movement and stuff like that. So I'm interested in reading this because it sounds like it might be along those lines. Yeah. Okay, now into the physical books. I have a mixture of stuff from my shelf and from the library, and we'll just start at this end from the library section. My little library receipt tucked in there. So this is one of the books that's an exception. I believe this is 255 pages, but I mean, like, it is super tiny compared to like a regular size book, right? It's super tiny, so that was fine that it was that that big. And this is An Elderly Lady Must Not Be Crossed, and this is actually a sequel. I was looking for the original, which is An Elderly Lady is Up to No Good, but I believe I can read this. It's just short stories, so I'm hoping that I can just read this one. The other book I just picked up and showed you is Ring Shout by P. DeJilly Clark. This is super popular on BookTube at one point, and I've been meaning to read it, and finally I found it at the library. I believe this is an alternate history about the KKK, I believe. Yeah, that's about as much as I know. I've been wanting to read some of Clarke's works for a while and just haven't, so we'll start with this one. And then I have this. This was just something I randomly found. Bibliophile Diverse Spines by Jamise Harper and Jane Mount. And it is like a little graphic book where they talk about diverse books and authors and stuff like that. So that seems really cool. So I'll definitely be adding to my TBR after reading this book. This was another book I randomly stumbled upon. I did have a list of books that I was specifically looking for, and then when some of them weren't there, I decided to, you know, find some alternates, and this was one of them. This is called Home Reading Service by Fabio Morabito, translated by Curtis Bauer. I should say the translators. And this one is about a man who's sentenced to a year of community service, and the way he does that is he goes to people's homes who can't leave and he reads to them. And that just sounds really cool to me, but it also says, like, at first Eduardo seems unable to connect. He movingly reads the words of Dostoevsky, Henry James, Daphne du Maurier, and more, but doesn't truly understand them. And then, of course, he probably does come to understand them, so that sounds like really cool. Books about books and people, books about readers just really appeal to me. I also picked up Night by Elie Wiesel, and this is, I don't know if it's fiction or non-fiction. It was in the biography section. I can't really remember, but it's about his experience in the Holocaust, and it's also philosophy in a way. Yeah, so I'm interested to read that. And this book jumped out at me on the shelves. It's called Curry, Eating, Reading, and Race by Naben Ruthnum. And we talk a lot about racism from the Black perspective, but that does happen in Canada too, but a lot of the racism that I think doesn't get talked about is the racism towards Indian people, especially in Canada. I've noticed that quite a bit. Like, people have no fear talking about how much they don't like people from India and Pakistan, and I don't understand because, you know, my experience is totally different from their experiences, I guess, and, you know, they're racist and I don't agree with racism, and I love Indian culture and Indian food and all that stuff too. We should just not be racist. So this was an interesting book looking at food and racism in Canada. I believe he's from Toronto. Yeah. This is another bigger book, but it is also like a graphic novel almost. It reminded me of Ali Broch's books. I was actually looking for the sequel to her book when I couldn't find it, and so I saw this one and thought I'd pick it up. It's All Absolutely Fine by Ruby Elliot. She goes by Ruby etc. online. I believe she has bipolar disorder. I was flipping through this and I saw one of them addressing that, so that'll be interesting to read about. Yeah, and I love these little, you know, what is she doing with the crocodile? The crocodile's name is Judith. I have to read and find out. So that's okay that this book is more than 250 pages because it is graphic. And this book was on my list and I thought it was a lot shorter, I guess because I had it initially as an audiobook and maybe I will listen to it as an audiobook. But when I picked it up I realized it was quite chunky. This is A Lesson Before Dying by Ernest J. Gaines. And this is a classic work of Black American literature. I think it's from the 1990 actually. It's not 1993. Yeah, I don't like knowing a lot about the books before I go in, so that's why I don't know a lot about these books. I just know I've seen this book on a lot of lists of books to read, and I was looking through my audiobook list and noticed that it was a short audiobook, but it is 250 pages. But maybe I'll have one day where I have absolutely nothing to do and we'll just sit down and read this all day. I have 3 more library books. This was one that was on my list, A Grief Observed by C.S. Lewis. And this is, I believe, after his wife died and looking at his faith after this really hard time in his life. And it's really quite short. And it's also Shakespeare. Of course, I didn't look at what they were reading before I decided what I wanted to read from Shakespeare. And I got Othello, and this looks quite big, but it has like the original text and then like modern English on this side. So this was the nicest edition they had of Othello, so I decided to pick it up. So it's 244 pages, but realistically it's 122 pages that I'm going to read because I've read all of Shakespeare before, so this will be a reread for me. So I might occasionally glance at this if I have some clarification issues, but I will be mostly reading the original text. And the last book I found was just really kind of this really slim volume, and I thought, oh, that would be something, you know, I can add. And I picked it up as an interesting title called Mouth Human Must Die by Lee D. Thompson, and I have no clue what it's about. The first sentence is, Dr. Shabazz tells me lies, but he's not as smart as me. So yeah, I just was really intrigued by this, and he's actually a New Brunswick author. You can't really see the little tiny sticker because the book is so tiny, but I thought that'd be something good to add onto my TBR. Now we're getting to my owned books, the books from my shelf that were quite thin or little, as the case may be. This is the Literary Conference by Cesar Era. I went on a splurge and bought a bunch of Latinx books a while ago, and this was one of them. Oh, he goes to a literary conference. That's what it's about, that says in the title. In that same splurge buying of Latinx authors, I got Hilda Hilst with My Dog Eyes. She's Brazilian, right? And it's an account of an unraveling of sanity of language, and that was enough to make me want to pick this up. So that sounds interesting. I also, if you don't know, Brave New World is one of my all-time favorite books, and I probably could reread it in one sitting. I love it so much. But I've never read Brave New World Revisited by Aldous Huxley, which is where he goes a few years later and he kind of re-examines what has and hasn't come true, and some of the themes of the book. Like what's this chapter called? Brainwashing. Chapter 7, The Arts of Selling. Propaganda under a Dictatorship. So it's like a nonfiction book about a book that he had written before, which is like so meta. Then I have another book of poetry. This is Sappho, a new translation by Mary Barnard. And it's just a collection of really short poems. So this will be another one I'll go to on a busy day to read. I also have this book that I can't remember where I got it, probably at a thrift store or something, but I can't find any information about it online. So yeah, there is like an entry for it on Goodreads, but there's like no information about it otherwise. Anyways, this is The Gravemaker's House by Reuben Weber. I believe he's Canadian. I'm not entirely sure. I just have a feeling. I shouldn't judge books and authors based on feelings, but I believe this is like a horror thriller thing. It's just got this really cool cover. Yeah, I can't tell you much about this book until after I've read it. Another little book is Ta-Nehesi Coates, Between the World and Me. I believe this is a letter he writes to his son about racism. I believe it's to his son. Yeah, it says son. I was right. Yeah, so that's something I'll read. We have a few rereads here. 21 Cardinals by Jocelyn Saucier. She's one of my favorite authors. I've loved it. Well, I've only read 2 books by her, and I've loved both of them. So I'd like to reread this one. This one is about a family, a large family. There's 21 of them, in case you can't tell by the title. And they come to a funeral, and some family secrets are going to come out. Really good. I love this one. Another reread for me is this little tiny book. It didn't come with a dust jacket. This is Owls Do Cry by Janet Frame. I listened to this on audiobook a few years ago, and it was my top book of the year. It's amazing. It's an Australian family drama, I guess, and each section follows 4 of the siblings, but their 5th sibling is kind of not mentioned, but she's still the center of the story. And she's in treatment for schizophrenia. So yeah, it's really good. Another reread is Lord of the Flies. I used to reread this like once a year all the time, and I've fallen out of that, so I thought I'd get back into it. I know this one's, you know, a bit longer than my under 200 pages. It's almost 250, but as I said, it's reread, so they tend to go by faster, right? Yeah, I'm looking forward to digging into this again. The last reread is How I Live Now by Meg Rosoff. I call this one of my favorite novels of all time, but I've only read it once, so I need to read it again, so it can actually probably go on this shelf up here with all my other favorite books. And this is like, it seems like your typical YA post-apocalyptic, you know, thing, but it kind of takes all those tropes and sets them on their head. You know, she's not out there to save the world. She's out there to just reunite with her family. And it's just so touching and heartwarming and realistic, more than, you know, typical YA post-apocalyptic girls could save the world kind of stories. It's kind of like a real apocalypse. I also want to read The Midwich Cuckoos. This is slightly over 200 pages, but the show's coming out in September, and I'd like to read the book before watching it. I have not read this one. I know it's one night all the women in this community pass out and they wake up pregnant and they all give birth around the same time. Yeah, what happened? Now we're on to the last two books, and the first one is Banana Yoshimoto's Lizard. This is a series of short stories. It says there's 6 in here, and I read some of her other short stories and really enjoyed them. And the last book is a book I'm surprised I haven't read yet. Nick Bantock's The Venetian Wife. He wrote the, oh, it says right here, Griffin and Sabine series. It calls it a trilogy here, but there's like 6 books in there now. And he's an artist and a author, so he's got like little weird pictures in here. There's some beetles. What else? Ooh, what's this one? Ooh, is that supposed to be Ganesh? I don't know. Yeah, all sorts of stuff. Just like a map. It's just a really cool book. I have no idea what it's about. Thoroughly bored with your job at the local museum, Sarah Wolf heads to the gallery to take another look at the new drawing she can't stop thinking about. The one of the Hindu god Shiva who dances. Okay, so that probably was Ganesh. Yeah, that sounds really quite cool. So those are the 30 books I plan to read. Let me know if you're doing Shorty September, and if you've read any of these books and what you think of them, and thank you for watching.